The diplomatic delegation from the Galactic Confederation stood bewildered as they observed the human military unit's operations. Commander Tai and Lieutenant Jun exchanged puzzled glances as they watched the humans move with precise coordination, despite what appeared to be minimal verbal communication. The aliens had expected to see a clear chain of command, with officers barking orders and subordinates responding with immediate acknowledgement. Instead, they witnessed something entirely different. "Their command structure defies our understanding," Ta whispered, his four eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of confusion among his species. "Who leads them?" Lieutenant Jun's skin shifted from its normal blue hue to a paler shade, indicating her agreement. "I see no one giving explicit commands, yet they move as one organism." The aliens had arrived on Earth 3 days ago as part of the official welcoming committee after humans had finally developed the necessary technology to join the interstellar community. In those 3 days, they had been impressed by human resilience and adaptability, but this military unit presented a puzzle they couldn't solve. Most species in the Confederation relied on strict hierarchies with clear indicators of rank and authority. Leaders spoke loudly and definitively. Subordinates responded with verbal confirmations. This was the universal way of military organization across 17 sentient species, until now. Their attention settled on a quiet human called Doc. Despite bearing no leadership insignia that the aliens could recognize, officers and soldiers alike seemed to respond to Doc's subtle gestures. A slight tilt of the head, a small hand movement, even just a change in posture seemed to convey complex instructions that the humans understood perfectly. "That one," Jun said, pointing discreetly at Doc. "Watch how the others look to that human before acting." Tai observed more carefully. Indeed, even humans with multiple rank markers would pause momentarily, glance at Doc, and then proceed with whatever task they were performing. Sometimes Doc would offer a small nod. Other times, just a brief meeting of eyes seemed sufficient. Doc appeared unremarkable by human standards. Average height, sturdy build, with hair cropped short and graying at the temples. The human wore simple medical insignia, but nothing that indicated leadership status. Most curiously, while other humans engaged in casual conversation during their work, Doc remained silent, communicating only through those minimal gestures. "Perhaps their real command structure is hidden from us," suggested Ta. "A security measure." "Or perhaps," Jun ventured, "humans have communication methods we don't understand yet." Their speculation was interrupted when a tall human in a decorated uniform approached them. The aliens recognized him as Captain Han, their assigned liaison for the duration of their visit. "I see you've been watching our operations with interest," Han said with a warm smile. "Any questions I can answer for you?" Ta hesitated before responding. In Confederation protocol, it was considered impolite to question another species' command structure, as it could imply criticism. But curiosity overrode diplomatic caution. "We are confused by your organizational methods," Tai admitted. "In our combined forces, authority is clearly marked and verbal commands ensure precision." Han nodded understandingly. "Different species, different approaches. I imagine our methods seem chaotic to you." "Not chaotic," Jun corrected quickly. "Mysterious. Your people move with great coordination, but we cannot identify how commands are transmitted." Captain Han's eyes crinkled with amusement. "You've noticed our Doc," he smiled, glancing over at the quiet figure now examining some equipment with several junior officers. "I saw you watching." The aliens exchanged a glance, surprised at how transparent their observations had been. "That human bears medical insignia but appears to have unusual influence," Ta noted carefully. "Yet we have not heard Doc speak a single word." "Doc doesn't need to speak," Han replied simply. "Some of the best leaders don't." This concept seemed to bewilder the aliens even more. In their cultures, leadership was inseparable from vocalization. Leaders spoke. That was the natural order. In our species, silence indicates submission or subordination, Jun explained. Yet others defer to this silent one. "We do not understand." Han seemed to consider how best to explain. Doc has been with this unit for 15 years, served in more combat zones than anyone else here, has saved the life of nearly every person you see on this field at least once. The aliens listened with increasing interest. When someone has proven themselves that thoroughly, Han continued, they don't need to shop to be heard. A suggestion from Doc, even without words, carries more weight than an order from many officers. Tay's 4 eyes blinked again, this time in sequence that indicated deep thought. This is leadership by respect rather than by hierarchy. Something like that, Han agreed. Though Doc does have official medical authority, it's just that the influence extends beyond that formal role. June observed Doc more carefully now. The human was demonstrating something to 3 younger medics, hands moving precisely over medical equipment. Not once did Doc speak, yet the younger humans watched with complete focus, occasionally nodding their understanding. Fascinating, June murmured. In the Confederation, silence is a weakness. Here, it seems to be strength. Different approaches, as I said, Han replied. He paused, seeming to reach a decision. Would you like to observe our joint exercise tomorrow? Doc will be coordinating the medical response team during the simulated crisis. It might help you understand our methods better. Ta nodded eagerly, his eyes now blinking in the pattern that indicated excitement. We would be honored to observe. Excellent. I'll make the arrangements, Han said. Meet me at 700 hours at the east entrance. As Captain Han walked away, Tai and Jun remained fixated on Doc, who was now moving through the training field with quiet efficiency, pausing occasionally to correct a procedure or adjust equipment with nothing more than hands and expressions. There is something about that human, Ta whispered. Something we're missing. Perhaps tomorrow will provide answers, Jun replied. As they watched, Doc looked up suddenly and met their gaze across the field. For a brief moment, the human's eyes locked with theirs, acknowledging their observation with a slight nod before returning to work. The simple gesture sent an unexpected shiver through both aliens. Something about this silent human warranted further study, and they couldn't wait for tomorrow's exercise to learn more about the one called Doc. The morning of the joint exercise arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Commander Tai and Lieutenant Jun reported to the east entrance precisely at 700 hours as instructed. Captain Han greeted them with a warm smile and led them to an observation platform overlooking the training grounds. Today's scenario is complex, Han explained as they walked. A natural disaster followed by a systems failure at a mixed-species settlement. Multiple casualties, resource limitations, and communication challenges. June's skin rippled with interest. How will your teams coordinate without being able to speak each other's languages? That's part of the challenge, Han replied. Though most species here understand basic galactic common, we're testing protocols for when translation tech fails. The observation platform gave them an excellent view of the exercise field. Human and alien personnel bustled about, preparing equipment and reviewing procedures. Ta spotted Doc moving methodically among the medical teams, checking supplies and occasionally making adjustments to equipment or positioning. Doc will coordinate the primary medical response, Han said, following Ta's gaze. Watch carefully. A siren wailed across the field, signaling the start of the exercise. Artificial smoke billowed from several structures. Actors playing injured civilians began calling for help in various languages. The rescue teams moved in with practiced efficiency. For the first 10 minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. Then, without warning, all communication devices emitted a harsh static before going silent. This wasn't part of the scheduled exercise. System failure, an automated voice announced over the loudspeakers. All communication networks disabled. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Captain Han frowned. This wasn't planned, he muttered, reaching for his own communicator only to find it non-functional. Chaos erupted across the training field. The Confederation species, heavily reliant on their communication technology, scrambled in confusion while alarms continued to blare. Squads lost formation. Rescue operations halted mid-action. Orders couldn't be relayed between teams. Only in one section did work continue uninterrupted, where Doc was stationed. Doc moved with purpose through the disorder. While others shouted or gestured frantically, Doc remained calm, directing the medical response with minimal movements. A gentle touch on Private Sun's shoulder redirected him to a better position near a group of injured actors. A simple nod prompted Sergeant Key to recalibrate her equipment when its readings began to fluctuate. "Remarkable," murmured Ta, four eyes widened in fascination. "The communications failure hasn't affected Doc's team at all." "They've trained for this," Han explained, though he still looked concerned about the unplanned communications blackout. Doc insists on regular exercises without verbal commands. They watched as Doc approached a Rindala medic who was struggling to operate human medical equipment. Without a word, Doc demonstrated the proper technique, hands moving slowly enough for the alien to follow. The Rindali's tentacles mimicked the motion until Doc nodded approval. "No shared language needed," June observed, "just demonstration and replication." The exercise continued to unfold, but the communications failure had introduced real danger. An unexpected power surge caused one of the simulation buildings to actually collapse rather than merely emit smoke as planned. Ta gasped as the structure crumbled, trapping several participants, both human and alien, beneath the debris. This was no longer a simulation but a genuine emergency. Teams froze in confusion, unable to call for backup or coordinate a response. Officers shouted contradictory instructions. The carefully orchestrated exercise had transformed into actual chaos. Then Doc was moving, sprinting toward the collapsed building. With quick, decisive gestures, Doc organized the nearby personnel into an impromptu rescue team. Human and alien first responders were assigned tasks with nothing more than pointed fingers and pantomimed actions. Doc orchestrated the rescue without uttering a word, pointing to indicate where supports were needed, gesturing to show how to safely move debris, demonstrating proper techniques for extracting the injured. "Remarkable," murmured Commander Tad as they watched Doc guide both humans and aliens in perfect coordination. "They communicate without speaking." Captain Han nodded, pride evident in his expression despite the emergency. Doc learned long ago that in a crisis, actions matter more than words. The rescue operation proceeded with surprising efficiency. Doc examined each extracted victim, assessing injuries with practiced hands and sorting them by priority. Serious cases were directed to one area with a flick of the wrist, while minor injuries were guided to another with a tilt of the head. Most impressive to the alien observers was how Doc managed to convey complex medical instructions to species with entirely different anatomies and medical needs. When a Lorani was pulled from the rubble with a damaged breathing apparatus, Doc quickly sketched a diagram in the dirt, indicating to a human medic exactly how to perform an emergency repair. "I've never seen cross-species cooperation like this without translators," Jun said, her skin now pulsing with an excited blue glow. "It defies everything we thought we knew about interspecies crisis response." Doc believes medical care transcends species boundaries, Han explained. "The principles remain constant: stabilize, treat, transport." They watched as Doc knelt beside a young Xeroi whose carapace had cracked in the collapse. The injured alien was clearly distressed, its mandibles clicking rapidly in fear. Doc simply placed a gentle hand on the uninjured portion of its shell and maintained eye contact while examining the damage. The Xeroi gradually calmed, its clicking slowing as Doc worked. "That Xeroi should be in panic mode with a shell fracture," Ta noted with astonishment. "Their instinct is to attack any who approach when injured." "Doc has that effect on patients," Han replied. "Calm confidence requires no translation." As the last victim was extracted from the rubble, communication suddenly restored throughout the field. Orders and reports immediately flooded the channels. But around Doc, the work continued in the same silent efficiency as before. When the exercise was officially called off due to the accident, Doc gathered the mixed species medical team in a circle. Each received a simple nod of appreciation. the only acknowledgement needed for their exceptional performance under genuine pressure. I must speak with this human, Todd decided, already moving toward the stairs. The Confederation must learn this method. As they approached Doc's team, they saw the quiet human demonstrating proper splinting techniques to a group of trainees from 5 different species. Without a single word, Doc showed how pressure should be applied, where supports needed to be placed, and how to secure the bindings. They communicate without speaking, Jun repeated, still marveling at the sight. And somehow, all species understand. Captain Han smiled as they watched Doc finish the demonstration and check each trainee's work with careful attention. Sometimes, he said quietly, the most powerful statements are made without saying anything at all. After the successful rescue operation, Commander Tai and Lieutenant Jun couldn't contain their curiosity about the silent human who had orchestrated such an efficient response to a real emergency. They requested a formal meeting with Captain Han to learn more about Doc's background. The next morning, they gathered in a small briefing room at the joint facility. The walls were lined with pictures of various human military units in different environments. Captain Han arrived precisely on time, carrying a slim digital tablet. I spoke with my superiors, Han began as he settled into his chair. They've given me permission to share Doc's service record with you. They believe the Confederation might benefit from understanding this approach to leadership. Tay's 4 eyes blinked rapidly in excitement. We are grateful for this trust, Captain. Han placed the tablet on the table and activated it. A holographic display appeared above the device, showing personnel files and military documentation. Doc was once the most celebrated combat surgeon in the fleet, Captain Han explained as he showed the aliens Doc's extensive service record. 7 major campaigns, over 3,000 successful field operations, and 14 distinguished service medals. The display showed a younger Doc in crisp military dress uniform, standing tall and proud while receiving an award from a high-ranking military official. This doesn't match the person we observed, noted Jun, her skin shifting to a thoughtful shade of blue. The human in these images appears more conventional, more like what you expected from a leader. Han asked with a knowing smile. Jun nodded. The posture, the confidence in the eyes. Yes, this human looks like a commander by our standards. Doc was also known for brilliant lectures and training sessions back then. Han continued, swiping to reveal footage of Doc, addressing a room full of medical personnel. The sound was muted, but it was clear from the engaged expressions of the audience that Doc was a captivating speaker. What happened? Asked Lieutenant Jun, leaning forward with genuine concern. Something clearly changed. Captain Han's expression grew solemn. He swiped the display again, and new images appeared. A medical facility partially collapsed, smoke billowing from multiple breaches in its structure. 6 years ago, there was an attack on a forward medical facility near what was then a conflict zone. A terrorist group released a chemical weapon designed to target the medical staff specifically. Han's voice grew quieter. They wanted to eliminate our ability to treat casualties, to maximize the psychological impact of their attack. The aliens remained silent, their cultural disgust at attacking healers evident in their postures. Doc was the senior medical officer on duty. When the alarm sounded indicating chemical contamination, protocol dictated immediate evacuation and sealing of the facility. Han paused, taking a deep breath. Doc ignored the protocol. The display shifted to security footage, showing a figure moving through smoke-filled corridors, dragging patients to safety and directing other staff with urgent gestures. Instead of evacuating, Doc began organizing a rescue operation for the patients who couldn't move themselves. Doc personally went back into the most contaminated areas 14 times, saving dozens of lives that would have been lost if protocol had been followed. Tai and Jun watched the footage with growing admiration as the figure on screen, clearly Doc, worked relentlessly amid deteriorating conditions. The chemical agent was designed to target respiratory tissue, Han continued. Doc had given their own breathing apparatus to a critical patient during the 3rd rescue entry. By the final trip, Doc had inhaled enough of the toxin to cause permanent damage to the vocal cords and parts of the respiratory system. So Doc lost the ability to speak from inhaling toxic fumes, Lieutenant June summarized softly. Yes, the damage was irreversible. The best specialists tried various treatments, but none were successful. Han swiped to medical scans showing the damage to Doc's throat tissues. They offered artificial voice options, but Doc refused them. Why? Asked Ta, genuinely puzzled. Surely communication is essential for a medical professional. That's what the Military Review Board thought as well, Han replied. They recommended an honorable medical discharge. Doc fought the decision. The display changed to show written appeals and official documents. Instead of retiring, Doc transformed silence into strength, Han explained. Developed an entirely new approach to field medicine and training. Created a system of nonverbal commands that could work across any battlefield condition. And the military accepted this? Joan asked. Not immediately. Doc had to prove it could work, Han said. The breakthrough came during a natural disaster where all communication systems were down. Doc's team was the only one that functioned at full capacity. The screen displayed images of Doc in countless battles and emergency responses in the years that followed, hands steady even as chaos reigned around them. In each image, Doc worked with focused intensity, guiding others through complex procedures without speaking a word. When you've seen what Doc has seen, Han continued softly, you learn that words often fail anyway. The aliens contemplated this statement as they studied the images before them. There's more to it than just adapting to a disability, isn't there? Tai asked perceptively. Something about Doc's experience changed their approach to leadership itself. Captain Han nodded, pleased by the alien's insight. Doc once told me, back when speaking was still possible, that most people talk too much and listen too little. That in crisis, clear action speaks louder than any words. He swiped the display again, showing footage of Doc training a group of medics. The silent demonstration commanded absolute attention from the trainees in a way that lectures rarely achieved. After losing the ability to speak, Doc discovered that people actually paid more attention. They watched more carefully. They focused on the actions being demonstrated rather than getting distracted by words. A limitation became an advantage, Joan realized. Exactly. Doc's silence forces others to be more observant, more present. It creates a different kind of communication, one based on shared focus rather than verbal exchange. Tay's eyes blinked in the pattern that indicated deep contemplation. In our cultures, leaders speak to demonstrate authority. But this human silence somehow creates even greater authority. Respect is earned by actions, not claimed by words, Han said. Doc has saved more lives than anyone in our unit. Everyone knows it. No one needs to hear it spoken. June studied one particular image showing Doc treating a wounded soldier while explosions lit the sky behind them. The steadiness in those hands despite the chaos, that communicates more than words ever could. Doc believes that in medicine, and perhaps in life, what you do matters infinitely more than what you say, Han explained. The silence isn't just about physical inability. It's become a philosophy. A philosophy the Confederation might benefit from studying, Ta suggested. Our species rely heavily on verbal hierarchies, perhaps too heavily. Captain Han smiled as he shut down the display. Doc would appreciate that observation. If you're interested, Doc is conducting a special training session tomorrow with some of our medics. You'd be welcome to observe. We would be honored, Jun said immediately. As they left the briefing room, Tai turned to Han with one final question. Does Doc ever express regret about losing the ability to speak? Han considered the question carefully before answering. Once, after a particularly difficult mission, I asked Doc the same thing. Doc wrote a note in response. He paused, recalling the words exactly. It said, I lost my voice, but found my purpose. Fair trade. The aliens fell silent, contemplating the profound wisdom in those simple words. They had come to study human military structure, but were discovering something much deeper, a philosophy of leadership that transcended species, language, and limitation. Commander Tai and Lieutenant Jun spent the next few days observing Doc's training sessions, fascinated by the silent human's unique approach to leadership. Word of their interest spread quickly through the joint facility, drawing both curiosity and skepticism from other Confederation representatives. Representative Min, a high-ranking diplomat from one of the Confederation's founding species, was particularly vocal about his doubts. Min's species valued authoritative speech as the foundation of leadership, and the concept of silent command struck him as primitive at best. This human approach is interesting as a cultural study, Min remarked during a gathering of Confederation officials, but hardly practical for serious military or emergency operations. Captain Han had invited the aliens to observe a joint emergency simulation scheduled for the following day. Tai and Jun were eager to participate, but Min insisted on joining them, determined to assess this unusual human phenomenon himself. "I welcome your perspective, Representative Min," Han replied diplomatically. "Different viewpoints help us all grow." The simulation was set to begin at 900 hours in the facility's largest training area. Teams from 12 different species had prepared for weeks, planning to test a new integrated emergency response protocol under controlled conditions. At 8:42 hours, 18 minutes before the simulation was set to begin, the explosion happened. It wasn't part of any exercise. A power coupling in the facility's main reactor overloaded, causing a cascading failure that ripped through the eastern wing of the complex. The explosion rocked the joint facility, knocking out primary power and backup systems simultaneously. Tai and Jun had been walking with Captain Han toward the observation deck when the blast knocked them off their feet. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie blue shadows through the smoke-filled corridors. "That was no simulation," Han gasped, struggling to his feet. A thin line of blood trickled from his forehead. "We need to get to the command center." They moved as quickly as they could through the damaged hallways, joined by disoriented personnel from various species. When they reached the command center, they found only destruction. The room had taken a direct hit from the explosion. "The entire command chain," Jun whispered, her skin pale with shock. Captain Han attempted to access the emergency communication system, but it was dead. "Main power, backups, communications, everything's down." A crackling voice came through a damaged speaker near the doorway. "Warning. Radiation containment compromised in sectors 7 through 12. Oxygen recyclers offline. Estimated breathable air remaining. 73 minutes. Panic began to spread among the survivors gathering in the corridor. Representatives from multiple species started shouting orders in their native languages, creating a chaotic din that accomplished nothing. Species with natural hierarchies looked for their leaders, only to find them missing or injured. With the command chain broken and no clear authority figure remaining, confusion threatened to make the disaster even deadlier. Then Doc stepped forward, face illuminated by the blue emergency lights. The silent human had been helping injured personnel near the blast zone, and was covered in dust and minor burns. Without hesitation, Doc moved to the center of the gathering and gave a sharp whistle, one of the few sounds the human could still produce. The noise cut through the chaos, drawing all eyes to Doc's commanding presence. Using only hand signals, Doc began organizing the survivors into functional groups. A circular motion gathered people closer. A chopping gesture separated them into teams. Pointed fingers assigned specific tasks to each group. Representative Min watched with obvious skepticism. "Why should we follow this voiceless human?" He growled to Commander Ta. "I outrank everyone here in the Confederation hierarchy." "Perhaps this is not the time for rank," Ta suggested quietly, moving to join the group Doc had designated for search and rescue. Min's scales bristled with indignation, but before he could protest further, Doc approached him directly. The human's eyes held Min's gaze steadily as Doc handed him a radiation detector and pointed toward a corridor where several injured aliens lay trapped. I will take my instructions from proper authority, Min insisted, pushing the device back toward Doc. Doc didn't argue or force the issue. Instead, the human simply turned away and began demonstrating to others how to use the limited medical supplies available to treat different species' injuries. Doc showed a Novan medic how to adapt a human breathing apparatus for their different respiratory system, hands moving with practiced precision. Min watched, still resistant but increasingly curious as Doc's organizational system took shape around him. Different species began working together in ways that transcended their usual protocols. Humans lifted heavy debris while tentacled Rindeli extracted injured personnel from tight spaces. Insectoid Ceroi used their sensitive antennae to detect survivors buried under rubble. The warning system crackled again, radiation levels increasing in sectors 8 and 9. Oxygen levels at 68% of minimum safety threshold. As the situation deteriorated, Doc's methodical approach began showing results. Injured personnel were being evacuated to safer areas. Makeshift repairs had restored emergency lighting in 2 more sections. A team had located emergency breathing apparatus and was distributing them according to need rather than rank. Min found himself increasingly isolated as even his own species joined Doc's coordinated effort. He observed carefully, noting how Doc showed each group what to do rather than telling them. When a procedure wasn't understood, Doc would simply demonstrate it again, adjusting the approach until comprehension was achieved. When a small group of engineers couldn't determine how to bypass a damaged power conduit, Doc knelt beside them, sketched a diagram on the dusty floor, and walked them through the procedure step by step with gestures. Within minutes, they had restored partial power to the life support systems. The radiation detector in Min's hand began beeping more rapidly, indicating rising danger levels. He looked around and realized Doc had assigned him to the area with the most vulnerable injured personnel, those who needed immediate evacuation but couldn't move themselves. It was not an assignment of punishment, but of trust. Doc had given him the most critical responsibility based on his position and abilities. A young human approached Min, severely injured but still walking. "Sir," he gasped, "we need to move these patients now. Radiation will reach lethal levels in this sector within 15 minutes." Min looked at the radiation detector, then at the injured aliens depending on him. Something shifted in his understanding. Without further hesitation, he began organizing the evacuation, using the methods he had just observed Doc employing. When Doc passed by his section, 10 minutes later, Min was efficiently directing a mixed-species team in evacuating the injured. The human gave him a simple nod of approval before moving on to the next crisis point. "I understand now," Min whispered to himself as he watched Doc coordinate another team with nothing but gestures and expressions. Leadership isn't about who speaks with the most authority. It's about who acts with the most clarity. Hours later, when emergency crews from outside finally broke through to their location, they found an unusually organized disaster response already in progress. Despite the severity of the explosion, casualties were significantly lower than anyone would have predicted. As Min helped load the last injured alien onto a medical transport, he found Commander Ta working nearby. "Your silent human," Min said quietly, "has taught me more about leadership in one day than I learned in 30 years of Confederation service." Ta's 4 eyes blinked in the pattern indicating respect. "Doc doesn't teach with words," he replied. "Doc teaches by example." They both turned to watch as Doc continued working tirelessly, checking each evacuee, ensuring no one was left behind. Despite exhaustion and injuries, the human's hands remained steady, movements precise and purposeful. "I will be recommending," Min said formally, "that the Confederation study this approach to crisis management. Perhaps all our species have become too dependent on hierarchies and verbal commands." "Words can be misunderstood," Tai agreed. "Actions rarely are." As the emergency lights finally gave way to restored main power, they watched Doc give a final thumbs-up signal to the assembled rescue teams, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed more gratitude, respect, and shared accomplishment than any speech could have managed. News of the joint facility incident spread quickly through the Galactic Confederation. What could have been a diplomatic disaster instead became a turning point in human-alien relations. Reports detailed how a silent human medical officer had coordinated a multi-species rescue operation with unprecedented efficiency, saving hundreds of lives without speaking a single word. The Confederation Council called an emergency session to review the incident. Representative Min, once skeptical, now stood before the assembled delegates as Doc's most passionate advocate. "What I witnessed challenges everything we believe about effective leadership," Min told the council. "This human has developed a method of command that transcends language barriers, cultural differences, and even species limitations." After 3 days of testimony and evidence review, the council reached a unanimous decision. They would send a formal delegation to Earth to study this approach firsthand and consider its applications throughout Confederation space. 2 months later, the Grand Hall of the Human Military Headquarters was filled to capacity with representatives from every Confederation member species. The space hummed with dozens of languages as translators worked to keep communications flowing smoothly. High Commander Bin, the most senior military leader in the Confederation, stood at the central podium. As the lights dimmed, the conversations gradually faded to silence. "Today marks a significant evolution in our understanding of leadership," Bin began, her voice translated simultaneously into 27 languages. "For generations, we have believed that command requires voice. That authority must be spoken to be effective." The assembled crowd listened intently as Bin recounted the events at the joint facility, emphasizing how conventional command structures had failed while Doc's silent leadership had prevailed. "The Confederation formally recognizes the contribution of the human known as Doc," announced High Commander Bin, her voice carrying through the hall, "and establishes the first intergalactic silent leadership academy." At these words, Doc stepped forward from the line of human officers standing at attention near the stage. Unlike the others in formal dress uniforms, Doc wore simple medical fatigues with only a small pin indicating past service. The human's face remained composed, betraying no emotion beyond a quiet acknowledgement of the moment's significance. "This academy will train officers from all Confederation species in the methods that Doc has pioneered," Bin continued. "Methods that rely not on words, which can be misunderstood or lost in translation, but on actions, which speak the same language across all our differences." Captain Han watched from nearby, pride evident in his expression. He had witnessed Doc's journey from the beginning, from celebrated surgeon to voiceless medical officer to interstellar ambassador of a new leadership philosophy. "The first class will begin training tomorrow," Bin announced. 12 delegates, one from each founding Confederation species, have been selected for this honor. Doc stood quietly as delegates from 12 species presented themselves, stepping forward one by one. Each wore the distinctive uniform of their world's most elite military or emergency service. Together, they represented the finest commanders the Confederation had to offer, now students ready to learn from a human who couldn't speak. The ceremony concluded with a formal exchange of symbols. High Commander Bin presented Doc with the Confederation's highest civilian honor, a medallion typically reserved for those who unite different species in times of crisis. In return, Doc handed Bin a simple medical patch from the human's original unit, a gesture that spoke volumes about the value of humble service. As the formal proceedings ended and the crowd began to disperse, Doc gathered the 12 delegates in a circle at the center of the hall. Without preamble or introduction, the human began a simple demonstration, showing how hand positions and eye contact could establish trust across species barriers. Captain Han moved to stand beside Commander Ta, who had remained on Earth as the Confederation's primary liaison. "It begins," Ta remarked, his 4 eyes focused on a group. "Do you think they will understand? Some of these species have communicated through speech for millions of years." Han smiled as he watched Doc demonstrate a tactical formation to the mixed group. The human positioned each delegate precisely, adjusting stances and sight lines with gentle touches and clear gestures. Despite their vastly different physiologies, from the six-limbed Xeroi to the tentacled Rindali. Each followed Doc's silent instructions with increasing fluidity. The Confederation's most decorated officers now mirrored Doc's movements with reverent attention. A Lorani general, known for her lengthy battle orations, watched intently as Doc showed her how a simple hand signal could deploy forces more efficiently than a 5-minute speech. True leadership needs no voice, Han remarked to Commander Ta. It's a language all species understand. Doc caught his eye across the room and gave a single, knowing nod before returning attention to the delegates. The Academy will face challenges, Tai observed. Some species rely on pheromones or subsonic communications that humans cannot perceive. Doc will adapt, Han replied confidently. That's the real lesson here. It's not about the specific signals. It's about finding what works across differences. They watched as Doc led the delegates through a simulated crisis scenario. Using only gestures and expressions, the human coordinated a complex response that required each species to utilize their unique abilities in harmony with the others. Look how they're already beginning to communicate with each other without translation. Ta noted with surprise. The Xeroi and Rindali have never worked together directly before. It was true. The insectoid Xeroi was now using a simplified version of Doc's hand signals to indicate a plan to the tentacled Rindali. Though physiologically incapable of producing the same gestures, they had already found a common visual language based on Doc's example. This is just the beginning, Han said. Imagine emergency response teams that don't need to waste precious minutes on translation. Military units that can coordinate regardless of communications technology. Or diplomatic engagements where meaning cannot be lost in translation, added Representative Min, who had joined them quietly. I've already begun implementing these methods in my diplomatic course. The three of them observed as Doc concluded the first demonstration. The human gathered the delegates once more, made a simple gesture of hands together, then spreading outward, clearly conveying the message, together, then into the world. The delegates responded with their species' various gestures of understanding and respect. Though no words had been exchanged during the entire demonstration, comprehension was universal. Later that evening, as the facility quieted for the night, Doc sat alone in the Academy's new training room, reviewing notes for the next day's session. Captain Han entered with 2 cups of coffee, placing one silently beside the human. The Confederation analysts predict your methods will reduce cross-species emergency response time by 60% within a year, Han said, taking the seat nearby. They're already calling it the most significant advancement in interspecies cooperation since universal translation. Doc looked up with a small smile and reached for a notepad, quickly writing a message before sliding it across to Han. Not bad for someone who can't give a speech, Han read aloud, chuckling. No, not bad at all. Doc. The human took a sip of coffee, then wrote another note. Sometimes the universe takes away one tool to force you to develop better ones. Han read. He nodded thoughtfully. I think the entire Confederation is about to learn that lesson. Doc stood and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds where tomorrow the first official class would begin. The stars above shone brightly, each representing worlds where someday this new language of leadership might spread. Han joined his friend at the window. You've changed everything, you know. Not just for humans in the Confederation, but for how all species will work together moving forward. Doc simply nodded once, that same definitive gesture that had guided so many through chaos and would now guide the future of interstellar cooperation. In that simple movement was all the acknowledgement needed, all the words that didn't need to be said. Because true leadership speaks a universal language, one of action, presence, and example, understood by all species across the stars.